Hello, my name is Uri Aviv. I'm a science fiction enthusiast, an evangelist, I would say. That would be my first statement. I'm a arts producer, programmer, festival director, and artistic consultant here at Lecta. I am from Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv is a namesake for a utopian novel. It's not in its most utopian state at the moment. I'm happy to discuss that later on. I don't want this to be intrusive to our conversation about authoritarianship and how AI, and specifically AI media tools, have some intertwine well with authoritarian tendencies. But I did want to mention that because that's true. And for the past 2 years, I've been working with the Lichte team on technological innovation, media, arts, creative innovation, and have been very, very hard to try and keep a positive view on things, or at least a balanced view, a 6-7 view, if you will. Some people have kids, or are kids. It's hard because the Luddites get a bad rap, but you've got to get to know them better, I think, because they had some good ideas. And with that, I'd like to start our session with a little, with a few words I prepared about the ways the ways artificial intelligence incorporated into our media consumption. So AI has a lot of use cases, from astronomy to radiology, from basic science to healthcare, but we are here in a media slash film environment. We're going to talk about the industry, the ecosystem, and it's obvious that things are not going that well in that angle. Here's let's see if I can do it on my own. So I chose 3 themes: resistance, synonyms, and trust. Slide, please. So this is Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, just from a few months back. We see a future where intelligence is a utility, like electricity or water, and people buy it from us on a meter. Wunderbar. So, talking a little bit about resistance. It all starts with efficiency, with utility, with competence, even comfort. There's nothing wrong with the trains running on time. Am I right? Germans who use Deutsche Bahn? Okay. Technology evolves, society progresses, but the basics remain the same. Trains are now airplanes and robo-taxis and same-day deliveries and killer drones, and also still trains. Efficiency is frictionless flow now. We don't take cash anymore. No card is even required. Just touch your phone, swipe the app, add to cart, bombs away. There were many prophets for the utopian dystopia we now inhabit. Meron Gribtz is one of them. He was a main speaker at the 2016, so a decade ago, at the Global TED Conference. Gribtz presented the Tech Glitterary with his vision of the future, and the CEO of the now defunct company Meta. So he had a Meta before Meta. There's another Hebrew pun here, but I'll keep it to the Hebrew speakers for later. So Meta was defunct in 2018, but it was a viable, big AR startup. VR was already a known commodity, but Gribtz came over to TED to mesmerize everybody with AR technology. Slide, please. He presented the Meta Mark II, an AR glasses that we now know, augmented reality glasses. And Gribtz's vision was radical, as you can see. He offered the product and software that will allow for the neural path of least resistance. So you look around and you see the world as it is meant to be, as you want it to be. Maybe there are no races anymore, or genders. Most probably, you're directed to buy those sneakers you had in mind, which are at the shop to the left, but the end goal was you think it, you get it. The user interface might require hand gestures at first, then maybe subtle eye movements, but when we get those brain implants, 0 ohm, right? No resistance whatsoever. Gribtz wanted to make our thoughts, our lives, our very existence resistance-free. No problems, no challenges, no obstacles, immediate and complete end-to-end gratification. Meta ran out of money and closed down in 2019, but the prophecy for a resistance-free, friction-free, obstacle-free environment, an efficient life is alive and well. It is promoted and propagated by the Tech-Bro-Oligarchie, wannabe and actual dictators, and as it always has been, it's in the minds and hearts of fascists and techno-utopians everywhere. Now, a train arriving on time or not, it's a measurable event. Also measurable, some measurable things. The average home to work commute time, assuming the trains go on time. So is the upload time for a porn website. The number of matches per swipe on dating apps, the number of messages and responses following, the time it takes police to respond to a domestic violence call, the number of women murdered in domestic violence cases, the number of fatal car accidents. Yes, these are messy numbers, they're complex, they're dirty, because they're human. But beyond the cliche, there are numerous other measurements, metrics, numbers that are non-counted or unaccounted for. The number of underwater internet cables connecting on the World Wide Web, the price of a drink as part of the cost of a date, the number of people employed in an emergency call centers and how much are they paid to answer those calls, the speed limit. There's so many numbers, some public, some hidden, all defined by policy. Politics, by management, regulation, governance. And for decades, Silicon Valley has attempted to sell us on the idea that everything is measurable, everything is code, and that all metrics can be optimized, especially using technology. It worked for a while, trains on time, great, supposedly. Rockets not only launch, but land on autonomous barges in the middle of the ocean. Porn websites immediately accessible with 4K video. But there's a systemic failure in thinking the framework is applicable to all systems. And it is intrinsically, and this would be my case to make, undemocratic or even anti-democratic. Because democracy is a mess. Different, strange, weird, sometimes quite off-putting people have all sorts of ridiculous ideas, perceptions, hopes, and fears. And they all come together to establish joint language and then concepts, and they agree on rules of communication and behavior, followed by hopefully establishing some mechanism for government. So that in itself is ridiculous, that it is happening. Everyone participating in this mess have multiple allegiances. Allegiances that clash, values that clash, never-ending conflicts between generating trust and obfuscation. Democracy has a complicated, embarrassing relationship with optimization, technological or otherwise. The messiness, the confusion, the ambiguity, the need for trust to count on one's word. The mechanisms of democratic governments are meant to reduce them, but not eliminate them completely. To have them manageable. Because they remain part and parcel of the human condition. It's not a bug, it's a feature. So when technological entrepreneurs wanted to enter into governance, a collision between tech and democracy became inevitable, and AI is maybe a moment or one of the moment or the moment of impact. Slide, please. Here you can see Peter Thiel, one of those techno-utopian entrepreneurs. Here he is a decade ago, the only Silicon Valley entrepreneur speaking at the Republican National Conference supporting Donald Trump on his first election bid back in 2016. These are his words in 2010 at the Libertopia conference. Maybe you could actually unilaterally change the world without having to constantly convince people and beg people and plead with people who are never going to agree with you through technological means. This is where I think technology is this incredible alternative to politics. The task in this world, where politics has become so broken and dysfunctional, is to find a way to escape from it, not a way to fix it. So, thank you, Peter. Lovely sentiments. Debate, discussion, deliberation, confusion, contradiction, resistance, opposition, conviction, persuasion, belief, doubt, trust. All of these concepts and more form the backbone of democratic governance. All can be tech-assisted, rough edges smoothed, but all antithetical to measured optimization by technology. There are, however, other forms of government that can and are helped by tech optimization. Forms of government that do not offer complexity and nuance, do not require nor allow for contradiction or dissent. Authoritarians and fascists work perfectly with techno-utopians. When people are distilled to numbers, optimization becomes purely mathematical, and when there are established metrics and numeric goals are set, solutions follow. AI is the perfect tool for the veteran dictator or the aspiring despot. Deliberation, negotiation, compromise require messy communication between individuals, between and within groups, between groups, parties, communities. Disagreement and confusion are resolved through connection, through reflection, through a rigorous and time-consuming effort to understand one another. And when there's no confusion, there's no need for all that. And a quote commonly attributed to Stalin, no people, no problem. Opposition, objection, resistance, these are the heart of humanity and democracy and are at odds with fascism and AI. And just as a by the way, I'm just going to go on a tangent because I've been talking about resistance and friction and frictionless societies and frictionless democracy. Maybe you think about how you have frictionless sex, but that's for later, maybe a panel later on this day. Now, I've used an unbearable amount of synonyms, and I'm sorry, but I'm not sorry because that was the intent. To think there are so many of them, and in every human language, there's so many intricacies, nuances, quirks of language. Not in machine language, not in code. There's no poetry or ambiguity necessary in code, no historical context required for an economically viable task to be done. Some would see this, or some of you might say this is oversimplification, that I'm dogmatic. I would agree. But another issue of humanity is that we have a limited attention span, so you're going to live with my understanding of things, and maybe we'll contest each other later. George Orwell's prophetic 1984 book named it Newspeak. Slide, please. Just reading the marked section. Don't you see that the whole aim of Newspeak is to narrow the range of thought? In the end, we shall make thought crime literally impossible because there will be no words in which to express it. Every year, fewer and fewer words, and the range of consciousness always a little smaller. No need for synonyms or antonyms. If you want society to be productive, efficient, effective, even comfortable, we need language to reflect what it does and should do. There needs to be no ambiguity. Redundancy is redundant. One word to signify one thing. We don't need both liberty and freedom. What's the point? Simple, effective, economical, better communication for greater efficiency. Optimize the dictionary, optimize the mind, optimize our thoughts. Slide, please. The best way to keep a prisoner from escaping is to make sure he never knows he's in prison. I've known that quote for a while. I've researched it. It's supposedly by Dostoevsky, but there's no clear attribution. There's no veracity to that claim, but I'm going to use one of my favorite all-time media critics and comedians, Stephen Colbert, whose last show is May 21st, mark it in your calendar. He coined the term truthiness. It sounds like something Dostoevsky would say, so it sounds truthy. So I'm gonna assume it's true. Now, we're at a crucial moment in history. We've built institutions that operate first and foremost on mutual trust. Government, justice, science, media, even banks, even our money, even markets, they're all based on trust. And these have allowed us exponential growth from 1 to 8 billion people, and health and education, and to manage human affairs on a larger and larger scale. And we've been taking a wrecking ball to smash these institutions one by one, and to be precise, to smash trust. Now, there's an irony that the gargantuan, monopolistic US conglomerates of the late 19th and early 20th century, the railroads, the petroleum companies, the shipping lanes, the electric companies, they were called trusts. And their breakup was made through antitrust laws. Trust is another conundrum at the heart of the AI and its alignment with dictatorship, authoritarianship, compliance. Trust in the aforementioned institutions is critical for a politically well-informed and active polity, which in turn is the foundation for a democratic society. In his 1980 essay, The Cult of Ignorance, and this is him actually writing it, I've made sure it's not like Dostoevsky, The Cult of Ignorance, Asimov warns of the strain of anti-intellectualism that has been a constant thread winding its way through our political and cultural life, nurtured by the false notion that democracy means that my ignorance is just as good as your knowledge. Slide, please. This has been remarkably extended by the internet. This is a well-known meme, and if you don't know it now, you do, from a prophetic meme, a science fiction meme from 1993 on the internet. Nobody knows you're a dog, indeed. Asimov's anti-intellectualism was on the web as anything else was, but it really found its home on social media, where it is optimized and monetized. LLMs, large language model AIs, are the most recent innovation, diluting our trust in journalism, academia, government, and any type of actual professionalism or scholarship, democratizing, I'm going to use a lot of air quotes for that, the ability to manipulate reality, or at least the snippets of reality, the fragments of texts and images and videos of 15 seconds or less that we call reality nowadays. Little bits of bytes of reality traveling at the speed of light. Very little of it actually reality. Much of it misinformation, disinformation, propaganda, fabrication, spam, and slop. Never has it been more true that a lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is putting its shoes on. This quote is usually attributed to Mark Twain, but there's no record of it ever being said by Mark Twain. It's potentially a lot older. Jonathan Swift, the writer of Gulliver's Travels, said something similar. But the lies, the spam, the slop, are not the ends. They are the means to sow distrust and create a tsunami of antitrust in a literal sense, not in the wonderful sense of it breaking up monopolies. It's meant to have the public distrust en masse in any and all forms of communication from previously trusted institutions. Hannah Arendt, as a final quote, actually, Hannah, the ideal subject of totalitarian rule is not the convinced Nazi or the convinced communist, but people for whom the distinction between fact and fiction, the distinction between true and false, no longer exist. The goal is not to make us believe in any specific lie, but to make us quietly quit the very search for truth, to give up on it because looking up the truth behind every social media post, every news article, is so labor intensive, we'll just quit. We'll just not care anymore. Not only, but we'll resign to pay the multitude of rents we owe these newly formed technology trusts, and yield to authority, and bow down to the new dictators of our time and their AI robber barons. Slide. With that, to elaborate further and to discuss and to give credence or maybe some contention to what I just said, I'd like to invite two guests I'm very excited that have agreed to come over to Lichter. You're both invited. Let's do the applause at once. Paris and Maya. Paris Marx, Canadian. Have a seat while I... Paris Marx, who just arrived this very late last night from St. John's. So you needed to go west and then east. So Canadian technology critic, Marx hosts the award-winning podcast Take Won't Save Us. Lectures worldwide on the politics of technology. We've first met at Republica 2 years ago, I think. And that was lots of fun. Well, fun. Paris is the author of Road to Nowhere, and his next book, Hyperscale, will be published
in October. We'll see if it gets translated into German.
Maya van Limput is a researcher and the UNESCO chairholder on images of the futures, plural, and co-creation of the research group Open Arts and Futures at Erasmus Brussels University of Applied Science and the Arts. In partnership with photographer Bram Goetz, she runs a long-term independent project for expanding images of the future, combining conversation-based approaches and visual ethnography with multimedia co-creation. That's a mouthful, Maya. Just say you're an artist, man. Oh, no. Her critical, forward-looking interdisciplinary work on media, culture, arts, cross-cultural communication, development, and science and technology in society uses experimental and participatory approaches, which we're part of right now, in some way. Van Limput is a fellow of the World Futures Studies Federation and the Center of Post-Normal Policy. And boy, do we need some post-normal policy. And future studies, and a founding member of the Interdisciplinary Visual Arts Collective, OST, and the Plurality University. Thank you both for being with us, coming over from Canada and, well, not from Belgium, but from Scotland, but from Belgium. I'll figure this out, but I did ask for a quirk in language because I just read this really awful text. And I want to gather some smiles. So I would hope for, I've got some of my own, but give us a quirk of language in languages that you know. How do you count? I know that in German, it's really weird how you say like 6:45. It is weird for some other people who don't speak German. Who's a German speaker? You a little bit.
I understand it. Yes.
How do they say 6:45?
They say 7:75. Yes, thank you.
7:75.
Mm.
And let's give the other example. French speakers, anyone?
Oh. That
Come
would be me.
on.
I'm a Belgian.
Okay,
I
count
also
to
speak French,
84, please.
You're Canadian.
How do you say 84? So please explain to the class what you just said.
As a matter of fact, the times isn't even there.
No. You need to know math pretty well, though. You know, it's a helpful training. Yeah.
Yes.
Anyone
Unless
speak
you're in Switzerland, then you're fine.
Danish? Anyone Danish? Is there Danish
Belgium.
around?
As well? Yeah.
I saw a Danish speaking person before. Damn it. I'll just say that 95 is even worse in Danish. It's 2.5 times 20 plus 2 times 20 plus 5. But now I'll take this away and I'll ask you, give all of us a quirky synonym or a quirky language anecdote. So we'll have a good laugh about AI and its miserable excuses as a way of pretending to understand human language. If you can. I'm sure we can. I know we can.
Well, we know that all the forward-looking words that have to do with the future, right? And because I speak more than one language, I sometimes have to say something in English or in Dutch because it doesn't exist in the other language. And so one of those is that in English we look forward, and something can be forward-looking. And so it would be forward looking in Dutch is looking forward. Hang on, and which is not the same thing, right? And then there is een vooruitzicht, which is actually literally foresight. But foresight is actually like a capacity or a thing we do. And in Dutch, it's the thing that you are seeing. So for me, this question around synonyms, thank you, brought up a whole other set of language games, actually. And some of them are also to do with what they actually, what words are used to refer to the same thing out there in the world, depending on how you see that thing and how you contextualize it. Like there's the cultural field, or the cultural sector, or the cultural community. And, mostly we're pointing at the same blurb in the world. And whether we say field or sector or domain or terrain, it makes a really big difference in how we actually deal with it. And that kind of language sensitivity is just not around enough for people to be continuously seeing. Now I'm made to think of something as an economic thing, and now I'm made to think of something as a relational thing. And so I think that the synonym game is very interesting, but also because of the way it actually expands into all these other ways, that words have other meanings in other contexts, and that language is much broader than the actual words.
We played around this yesterday. The film industry, the film community, the film ecosystem really depends on where you discuss that for the specific word to be the relevant word for the relevant context, but denoting an area of the same thing. But would you like to?
You have a
You
few?
have one?
Sure. I was gonna say more because the prompt you gave us was more on like untranslatability, right? And I was kind of feeling like I'm not sure I agree with untranslatability. Like I think that we can translate most everything. It's just the words that we might use, might be a bit more in order to say something in a different language. And then my question was like, are we thinking of something like in English or French that is untranslatable in any other language? I don't know enough other languages to say for sure that that is always the case. Or are we just talking about specific languages? And then, of course, thinking about the languages that I speak, as you say, there are certain moments where I want to say something in French just because it feels more natural to express that sort of a thing in French. But can I not express it in English? I'm sure I can. I know I can. And then that also brings to mind, how not just in Canada, English speakers in other places as well, but we'll frequently use French words while speaking English because they're words that we're used to saying in French, right? Or they express concepts that are more associated with the French. We can talk about déjà vu in a different way in English without using that kind of French term. But then I even think about French itself, right? And just in the same way that there are like distinctions between English in different parts of the world, we'll say something different in Canada than it will be said in the UK, than it will be said in Australia and South Africa, but we're all still speaking English. And, in French, if you're in France and you refer to tomorrow, it's going to be the weekend, le weekend. But if you're in Quebec, it's the fin de semaine. It's the end of the week. And so, even within these languages, there's a bunch of kind of loaning between them, words that are very similar between languages in different parts of the world that speak the same language, but, use completely different words to express things. I host a podcast in English. In France, I also host a podcast. In Quebec, I host a balado. So, it's just completely different, right? So I don't know, that's my thoughts. I also found it very funny that you were talking about newspeak and the attempt to restrict language, and then you started reading out Maya's bio and said you were using too many words for her to describe what she was doing. So
We need as many words as possible. You made me think about pièce de la résistance, about faux pas. There are words as English speakers or as international citizens or as Hebrew speakers, we would utilize that French term or a term in another. There's a term in German I know that is highly used, Heimat, that does the uncanny. What's the word? Unheimlich. So that are very hard to translate. I'll give two examples that are somewhat recent and somewhat political. There's a blockade going on, and there's another blockade going on the blockade. I assume some of you may know about the blockade. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, 1962, the US held a blockade on Cuba. A blockade, according to international treaties, and I believe the UN Charter, is an act of war. The US president, in all of his speeches, in every speech given by any person from the US government, never said blockade. It was a quarantine. A quarantine of not defensive, of offensive weapons to Cuba in order for, normal ships carrying normal items were able to cross freely after inspection, but if you were carrying intercontinental ballistic missiles with or without atomic warheads, then you were sent back. So it was a quarantine, and they argued about it and were very hopeful that it translates well to other languages. And I'll give an example that may lead to our discussion about future and futures. This is from a poet and author friend of mine, Tamar Rafael, who is currently in Berlin and is teaching Hebrew. Hebrew has 3 tenses: past, present, and future. It also has an imperative, but I'll put that aside.
I bet it does.
Biblical Hebrew. Well, I don't know. How many tenses does Dutch have?
About 8 or 9.
So, political issues started coming up in her Hebrew lessons in Berlin. And like myself, she's a radical leftist and gotten into some hot water of saying words in Israel. But her students wanted to introduce some political issues into the conversation. There's a book written by Omer El-Akkad. Its title is "One Day, Everyone Will Have Always Been Against This." It is untranslatable to Hebrew. Of course you can but there's and I'm making a linguistic point, also commentary on AI. I'm happy to discuss other political aspects as well. Of course, this is a political conversation as well, but one day everyone will have always been against this is very difficult to translate into a language that has only 3 tenses: past, present, and future. With that, let's move on. Now that you've charmed everybody, and now I get everybody down. Man, what did I do? In the piece before, I stated that a collision between tech and democracy became inevitable, and AI is the moment of impact. I'd love to hear both of your thoughts on that. Was it inevitable? Is this the moment of impact, or the moment of impact was social media, or the cookie, or the wheel? I don't know. When was so, starting with you, maybe, Paris?
Sure. I don't think it's inevitable that this had to happen at a moment when like generative AI is coming about and is the next popular thing. Like the first thing that comes to mind to me actually when I hear you say that is how I feel like a lot of our conversations around technology and the impacts of technology and the potentially like oppressive uses of technology are, they're very kind of trapped in a recency bias, I would say. When you look back, these debates have been going on for a very, very long time. Computation itself, as we know it today, really comes out of World War II and kind of military work, right? Even coming out of that period and then into the 50s, 60s, 70s, there was a lot of debate about how these technologies were actually going to be used as they kind of left the military sphere and went out into the governmental sphere and the corporate sphere and other spheres of of social and economic life. And in those cases, people vigorously fought against the implementation of computers in workplaces because of the ways that this enhanced the power of, managers and bosses to oppress workers and to change the way that work was done in a way that gave them more power over the workplace. And even in that case, it wasn't kind of set in stone that technology had to work in the way that it was being implemented. But because power and because resources and wealth were located in a particular part of capitalist society, that technology was implemented and developed in a particular way because those were the people who could shape the course of that development. There were kind of workers who developed alternative means of production going back to the Industrial Revolution, but of course in the computational era as well. But often those uses of technology or those ways of using new technology were not the ones that were kind of mass adopted because there was not the incentive to do so, because the people with power did not want to see, workers kind of maintaining their power over production. They wanted them to be de-skilled and disempowered, right? So I feel like the kind of discussion of technology can never be separated from the politics that surround the technology, because that ultimately shapes the direction that technology goes, right? For me, technology is not something that kind of develops along one path, and as we hear from Silicon Valley, it's just a question of how fast it develops or how slow. The question is actually which technologies are we developing, which ones are we implementing? And today there is, of course, a lot of debate around AI, around computational targeting systems, weapon systems, all this kind of stuff. You go back to the Vietnam War, these same debates were happening around the use of technology to target where bombs were going to be dropped in Vietnam, in Laos, in Cambodia. People actually attacked computer centers, people bombed computer centers where this work was being done on university campuses in the United States.
You're talking about anti-war, the anti-war movement in the US.
Absolutely, yeah. And this was, computation was kind of central to those debates at the time, right? And so I think when we start to have these debates today about technology and democracy, I think it's important to understand that these are not new debates that are just happening in our moment, but certainly we are seeing this kind of further development because of how far we've gone along this political track over the past number of decades, where we have reached this place where kind of some of the most powerful people in society are the tech billionaires. They are very powerful. They command very powerful companies. They have amounts of wealth that are almost unimaginable. And they're deploying that in such a way to protect themselves, to protect their power, but also, to try to build a sort of an idea of society that they think aligns with, their vision of how this world should work. And, as you said with that quote from Peter Thiel, that vision is a very anti-democratic one for many of these people, because they want to implement technology, they want to do what they want to do, and they do not want to be held to account, to be checked by a democratic public. They just want to be able to do what they want to do, and they also have a very technocratic vision that experts, elites, the geniuses and the smartest people, the people with the highest IQ, as they see it, should be the people who are commanding society, who are making decisions about society, and they see themselves as part of that elite and that class, and much of the rest of the public just people who should be accepting the decisions that they make.
Thank you. I learned a lot. So a little bit less factual, I do want to make a few points. And the first thing is around inevitability to begin with. Because we accept that we talk about futures rather than one single future, the one that we're going to get. Because we understand that at every single point, nothing is, things aren't inevitable. You can go one way or another. And so this was never inevitable.
You just said that we all accept something that might be rather new to people.
I understand that. I will come back to that at a later stage. But I think we've discussed multiple times why the S is behind the word future. And actually the S is also behind everything that happens in the past. Something else could have happened, right?
Or we could reinterpret something that happened in the past differently
And as a matter
over
of fact,
time.
I'm sure there's lots of stuff that happened in the past that three people that agree on a lot actually all interpret in different ways and give different names and different labels for moments in history, for example. That exists a lot with your synonyms as well.
Yep.
So the question of inevitability is a bit strange, and then there's also the technology impact assessment perspective, where the McLuhan idea of we shape our tools and thereafter our tools shape us might have something to suggest about how these directions are actually taken. I'm personally more of the idea that this relationship is mutative, and that when new technologies come about, the powers that are already deeply embedded in our systems are also deeply embedded into these actual tools that we are making and using, and that by using them, we reproduce these same structures and these same systems, and they become part of ourselves. I mean, the glasses are a really easy example of for people to understand how we actually become really entwined with the tools that we use. And then there's that other thing, and that's about, is it of our time or is it of AI, right? And I think I will agree with my neighbor here. I think there's something about it being about our time, from our time, that once we don't look at that really recent evolution, but we see our time, I don't know, as post-World War II or something like that, then we begin to understand things differently. In post-normal times theory, we think that it's not a specific piece of technology, but that creates these drivers that are, threatening the openness of our societies. These are things like speed, scope, scale, simultaneity, and they have come about with, changing modes of connectivity. It used to be that we had to take a ship to have use a boat to have a conversation with somebody in the United States, for example, and so speed. And it used to be that if we spoke about one subject, that, well, there were only a few other subjects, the neighboring domains that would have to be brought into the conversation. But now in any conversation that you have, and that's also our challenge here today, I think, you would have to involve every single other domain that's relevant in the world at the moment, that scope. And then scale, it means that something that happens in a community that counts 18 people can actually cause 48 hours later 2 deaths in riots in a street in a big capital somewhere else in the world. So these are the kinds of things I think that are at play here, and of course the changes where we really feel that we have new modes of working and being and relating, such as, for example, the advent of AI and it becoming, a widely used tool. These moments are the moments that increase this speed, scope, scale, simultaneity even further, and that's why we see them as like seeds for the trouble we're in, I think.
Do you have a comment, or because I want?
I always
I'm confused. I'm not confused. I am in a tension between should I be more relaxed and calmer, that everything has been bad all along, or 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 should I really press you on, are we going through a specific dramatic change? I will give the audience and all of us kind of a reflection on the fact that artificial intelligence is as you kind of refer to, it's an umbrella term that has almost lost all of its meaning, and or in order for it to have meaning, you really need to specify what you're discussing, what you're talking about, artificial intelligence. If you go to a CS academic conference, if you'll be using the word artificial intelligence, you'll be laughed out of the room. If you pitch a startup, though, if you pitch even a pasta sauce these days has to have some AI element to it.
Can really help your valuation.
If you're a sneaker company. So artificial intelligence was coined, I think, by a computer scientist in
Yeah,
back
John
in
McCarthy at the
1956.
Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Yep.
or around that time. And it's been going through loop, variation after variation after variation. We've had chatbots since the late 1960s. Eliza is the well-known first one. And we have been going through iterations of more interesting, I can say about technology, interesting, and also public-facing and more, I hate democratizing, but more available to the public resources. Although I talked to a chatbot, I remember, anyways, an Eliza type chatbot when I was in my teens. But so has everything been awful all the time, or are we experiencing something new? And is that something new on the technological side, or is it on the sociology, policy, politics side, or both, or neither? Please.
Yeah, I would just add a few points, right? And first to say, I very much agreed with everything that you were saying. On the point about artificial intelligence as a term, even, we're talking about language, right? Just think about the work that it does. The term artificial intelligence comes about in the 1950s, as you were saying, because John McCarthy is looking for more research funding, and the dominant, kind of, I guess, way of approaching computation at the time is cybernetics. And so he says, okay, I need some other kind of way of framing this, and he comes up with artificial intelligence as the thing that he is going to sell for basically his research proposal.
It's almost a Madison Avenue kind of term.
But yeah, totally. It's a very much like a marketing term. And the idea is, basically you're going to develop intelligence, a means of thinking within this machine. And this is kind of the, I would argue, ideology that, is created and is sold by someone like McCarthy and is, of course, picked up by many people after him. And you were mentioning Eliza, the chatbot, which was developed by Joseph Weizenbaum, originally from Germany, of course, but moved to the U.S. And he was also a very kind of technologically optimistic man. He worked at MIT as well. But after he developed the chatbot and saw how people related to it, he became a critic of artificial intelligence and of this approach to computation for the rest of his life. And him and John McCarthy really butted heads on their view of computers and their view of what he was calling artificial intelligence and what that would mean for society and all these sorts of things, right? He was very much an opponent of this notion that we should even be kind of thinking about letting computers make decisions on behalf of humans, because that can have real negative impacts on the lives of human beings, and that a computer can never think in the way that a human being does. But that's a bit of a tangent. It's besides the point. What I wanted to say on your question is, for me, I think the kind of advent of generative AI in particular since 2022 is certainly helpful to the political moment that we're in. I think it helps to kind of, as you're talking about speed, it helps to kind of accelerate things that we're already seeing. I think it aids this kind of fascist or far-right political project that the tech billionaires are pushing, but that many other governments, certainly the U.S. government, is forwarding at the moment. It's very useful to them. But would they have not sought to pursue this political program without generative AI? I don't think that is the case. I think it's just helpful that these two things are aligning in this very moment, and they are, of course, taking advantage of a technology that they have. If generative AI was not around, would they still be using more rudimentary forms of AI, social media, all these other technologies
Just 5
that are
years
there?
ago, you were talking about guns and not rifles, generative adversarial networks. The former version of AI. Am I not right? NNNs, neural networks.
Yeah, absolutely. I was less familiar with the other term that you were using, but yeah. But it's just to say that they're going to use what is there, right? What is available to them. Generative AI is there at the moment, and I think it's a technology that is very useful. And if you think about the technology itself, if you think of someone like Dan McQuillan, an academic in London who has done a lot of work on AI and its relationship to right-wing politics, it is a technology of classification, of ranking. It is a technology that you can use if you are of a certain political persuasion to say that, we don't need to make political decisions to make the world a better place. We don't need to make social investments. We just apply this technology, and the technology will take care of it, right? We don't need to invest in the public sector. We don't need to invest in the health system. We can just roll out new AI, and it will serve as someone's doctor or their teacher, or it will more efficiently make decisions in the public sector, so we can lay off all of these public sector workers, which is exactly what we're seeing governments do at the moment, right? So it aids in this project of decimating the state, decimating the social system, if you want to do that anyway, and you can use the technology as the narrative to help bring it about. And that's not even to talk about, the way that propaganda is generated, is spread across social media networks, all these sorts of things that we're seeing as well.
You've not even mentioned Doge. Wonderful. But I want to press you on one word, efficiency, because we all want the trains to run on time. Why is that bad? So how do you reconcile the paradox of efficiency within democracy? Can we not have a democracy that is invested and is aligned with the alignment problem? Can a democracy be aligned with technology and the optimized efficiency that that technology can bring forth, or is it just rudimentary a clash that cannot be maintained?
No, I think I would just say, briefly, not to go on too much, I think it depends on the type of technology that you're developing, right? Again, I don't think technology is something that is set in stone, that there's only one type of technology. The question is, what technology are you developing? How is it being rolled out? What is the political program around that technology? I even think back to the past, if you think about we probably wouldn't think of it as a technology today, but think of like sewage and hygiene systems and kind of the rollout of all this in our cities and things like that. It was not a profitable thing to do necessarily, but there was a political program that was built around the fact that you needed to improve cities because people were dying. This was kind of like a social thing to have to do, right? It wouldn't have happened if you just had private interests who were trying to make a profit off of your sewage system or something like that.
Eliminating child labor is very unprofitable.
Totally, yeah. We don't want to do that, right?
I want to extend the microphone back to Maya.
All right. This question of, is this a unique time, and is it uniquely bad?
You've mentioned post-normal times. And
yes, I'm using
I'm trying
the material.
To understand. Were there ever normal times that you were using post-normal? But go ahead.
Oh well, that's not. Oh well. So let's say that our time you know, if we make a diagnosis of our time, which is a very popular pastime, you go into any library, any bookstore, and you find all the different labels for this time, right? And if you bother to go back like 10 years and look at every label it's had, it's just maddening, and all of them are right too. Right? It is the Anthropocene, it is the Capitalocene. We are in hypernormalization, you know, all of that. You know, there's all this diagnostic of our time. It's a very important reflex, apparently. And I think that when we are in this in-between time, where we can clearly recognize that the old orthodoxies aren't working anymore, you know, the way that we've done things, command and control in many cases already for a long time. This is not new in itself. If we recognize that that's actually the causing the trouble that we're in, and we are, but there are no new modes that are functioning already, then you know that you might call that post-normal times. And then you can ask, you know, all the different moments in history that might have been like that. And whether that's uniquely the case for today or not. It's not so important. I think it is actually the case today that we have all these old ways of functioning and all the operational matters that have to do with efficiency have actually locked us into doing things a certain way and not another way. You know, they've sort of closed the roads, the paths that function differently. That could actually be functioning also maybe frictionlessly, if you prefer that, or that. So in my thinking, in times like these, it's the thing that you feel as bad is that, you know, the change itself is changing in a way, and it's becoming more chaotic, more complex, more contradictory, and we are really bad at holding contradictions, and we are really not like futurists. You're going to ask about how to go forward later on. You know, we pray for uncertainty, let's say, because that means that there are other options, that there are other ways of doing things, and that we can actually think about them and try them out and try again and, you know, try to improve somehow. But the complexity, chaos, and contradictions of our time, as you were describing in your opening talk, are contradictory to the neatly organized processes of representational democracy like we have it here, for example. They don't give space for infusing one perspective with another if these perspectives are contradictory. We don't, and that's also why it's not just about regimes, and it's not just about the corporations and the governments. Well, it is very much about those because that's where power sits. At the same time, we don't talk enough about how authoritarian our cultures become, our ways of dealing with each other, our ways of building expectations towards children and towards people who do things differently than ourselves. And I think that that's a really important factor to keep in mind, that when we speak about the authoritarian affordance that AI is becoming, or has become, or is, I'm not sure which time, which grammatical time to use now, but it's also in the habits of thought and in habits of rest and of play and of everything that we do, and the authoritarian flavor of so much that is going on doesn't always sit with what, I don't know, the Prime Minister decided. And I think that that's also something to bring into this conversation, because it's where we feel it, it's where we live with it.
You both touched on it. I want to expand and then expand into the wider reality and then go back and summarize into a shared reality. Um, One of your recent interviews was, I don't remember the exact header, but it was the problematics of CEO of X said Y, right? And
Literally.
Yeah,
there was-
yeah. CEO said a thing, journalism.
yes,
Yeah.
CEO said a thing, journalism, and I gave a moniker to specifically CEOs who speak about the future. I call them profiteers. Um, there's a pun there. And I want to connect you two on this because this has to do with authoritarians' view of technocracy or the because we do want expertise, we do want experts, we do want scholarship and academics and researchers and commentary from these people, and we want our politicians and CEOs to be knowledgeable and be able to speak about whatever they need to speak about.
Do we want our CEOs at all, though?
That's okay.
Thank you.
Oh, good, good. Okay, I'm happy. I'm happy for that argument. But so on the one side, so what's wrong with CEO said a thing, and Maya, for you, we're often described deterministic, kind of this will happen through this process. Maybe I've got it 3 to 6 months off. I'm not sure. But the future doesn't work like that. So it's starting with you maybe about future and futures, and then tell us about CEOs and how do we reconcile CEO said X with expert has presented his analysis.
So I'm not totally against genius forecasting. I think there's beauty in that. Somebody knows their topic so well that they can sense where things might be going. But I'm using again a grammatical time that might not exist in Hebrew here, and it's the where it might be going is very rarely framed like that. We know where we're going, and so we know what to do, and we know where you will be, and what you will need, and we will provide for it, right? I vividly remember.
Our glasses.
Well,
Lead you exactly to the store where you wanted to buy them.
where you can try them on because you couldn't do that on the screen. Yes. Now,
Just don't leave your house. You don't need to. Yeah.
so where were we going? Deterministic futures. Oh yes. So this idea of a single projected future that we need to see coming and that we need to know about so that we can prepare for it and so that we can plan for our place in it. And yes, that's very suitable to authoritarian modes, absolutely, because it says this is reality, and there's no room for interpretation. There's no room for alternatives. There's no room for asking just basically what else, and the future is often put like that, and then people say like, yeah, I ask people in my classes or other sessions, workshops, what interests you the most? What's probable or what's possible? And then you have a divided audience a lot of the time. Not sure it would be the case here, but so people say, well, you want to know what's likely and what's more likely than something else, because then you know what to prepare for. And then others say, like, yeah, but I'm interested in all the things that are possible. And then in futures we make this distinction, like, okay, and is it plausible now? Does it sound like something that could happen in like that if you tell the story, or does it sound preposterous, and is it still possible? You know, and a lot of the time the counter realities that are proposed as alternatives to that one single projected future are just called preposterous as a reflex. Yeah, that's not what we've had. It's not what we have. So it's preposterous that we might have it, but there are no sort of laws of nature dictating how we do things, right? I mean, there are actually, but none around how we organize socially and culturally, and how we are together, and what we do and don't do to each other. And so the idea of alternative possibilities in the future is why we emphasize the plural, and why we use futures rather than future. So I'm wearing these socks, and they say futurism. And there's futures and there's futurism. I'm a futurist, right? I could belong to both groups. I don't. Because futures is like an umbrella term for all the thinking around the not yet, but also around the present, that's actually concerned with different possibilities, more than one way of doing things, and more than one way of understanding things, and more than one way of talking with each other. And so while futurism was an early 20th century arts movement that got in league with fascism. So despite stylistic differences, you know, fascism is like the classical, the Roman look, and futurism as an aesthetic is about speed and angles and fragmentation and stuff. So it's quite
Fast cars.
But airplane crashes, very important. And I don't want to have talked about that today. I still need to take a plane.
Okay, we'll get to futurism maybe in the break.
Yeah.
But we were talking about the alignment between authoritarians and tech expertise. And I asked you about how do we, well, now you've gotten me on the, do we need CEO, do we want CEOs at all?
They can just be automated, right? AI can take their jobs.
So maybe I'll get us back to one of our many problems, but and I don't know if it's a unique one to our times. It's definitely different than it was a decade, 2 or 3 ago. Is there used to be a discussion about personalized medicine. About you'll get AI you'll be scanned, and AI, and 3 unknown, and 4 profit. And 4 you'll be given like pills that are specifically for you. Now we've got personalized realities, and many of them have been maintained through social media and through algorithmic media, but they've been only strengthened by the use of AI. While we're working in a democratic, humanistic, non-deterministic future that is futures and future imaginaries that are messy and contradictory, how do we get back to a shared reality? How do we do that? Sorry, you're the expert.
That one might be beyond me. Yeah.
Well,
I wonder if we've ever had a shared reality, truly.
I agree. I agree. But
And do we have to have it? Can we not just accept that we have all these people and realities and work with what there is? What's this need to be, the hive or something?
I think the distinction for me is, certainly we have always had forces shaping what we perceive reality to be. But I think in this moment, certain forces have a lot of power to try to shape the reality as we understand it in a way that benefits them and their interests, and that also disrupts attempts to present an alternative reality to the one that they want us to believe that we live in. And it's very beneficial for them to disrupt our notion of reality, because it allows them to just kind of like plow over everything else and exert their power in the ways that we have been seeing them do. And I think this kind of comes back to what you were saying and what you were asking. I believe you called it genius casting. Was that the word?
Genius forecasting.
Genius forecasting, yeah. And when I heard you say that, I am also not opposed to genius forecasting. But the question is, who are the supposed geniuses who are allowed to forecast and who we take seriously as forecasters? And I would say a lot of the people who we treat that way are not actually the geniuses that they try to present themselves to us as being, and actually don't necessarily have the kind of intelligence and knowledge of the future, but use their position as the so-called geniuses in order to present us particular futures that serve their interests and that shape our kind of collective vision of where we should be going as a society in a direction that benefits them and that justifies what they want to be able to do and the way that they want to use their power, so that we have less ability to push back on their vision of the future with alternative visions of the future that might be more kind of socially beneficial and socially oriented than the ones that they want to build or want to foist upon us. And in a sense, this kind of comes back to, I think, what you were saying earlier about efficiency and democracy and things like that too, right? And I don't think that there's anything like bad about having trains that run on time or having planes that are fit to a schedule.
Yeah.
Safe, certainly, yeah, we want that. Or anything like that. But then there's like the further question that comes of it, of like, why do we need to go everywhere so fast, right? Why does everything need to be so quick or so regimented? And I would argue that the reason that has to be is because, the kind of capitalist society that we live in kind of forces us to do things quickly, to, not waste time, to be maximally productive. Certainly over here in Europe, you guys have a bit more vacation time than we have in North America, but it's still quite limited, right? You still have only so much time that you can take to like enjoy yourself, to get somewhere, or what have you. You can't get on a ship and cross the Atlantic because that would take too much time and it doesn't fit in our schedules in, kind of like the modern world that we live in. And it has been created in this way for a certain set of reasons that, certainly there are a lot of people in society that don't want us to question those things. And to me, that also relates back to technology, right? We need to be constantly connected. We can never have outages. We can never lose our connection because that's just unimaginable. But what if our technologies were not so reliable? What if there were times when social media platforms didn't work? Would that really be the end of the world? It would only be the end of the world if we build our society on the notion that we need to be connected at all times, or else society collapses. And we don't need to build it that way, but I would say there are certain interests that want us to build it that way because of speed and efficiency and all these other things that they benefit from by having it built that way.
We need to wrap things up. You've reminded me of a story I tell when I talk about technology and its limitations and its regulation. There are we all want to reduce the number of fatalities on the roads. We all want less car crashes and accidents and so forth. And there was a point in time where there was a decision that could have been made, there again, could have been made, because we now use, or when we can use more and more aerospace and AI technology to make our cars still as fast as possible, but also safe. But if you just limit every car that's a private car, let's say, to 60 kilometers an hour, that will also lower dramatically the number of fatalities in car accidents. Just a thought about that. We're not going to resolve the problem today, maybe in another session tomorrow, but I'm very happy to have good reasons for continued discussion, debate, opposition, and as many synonyms as possible, because we need as many as we can. I don't know if we have a question, if we have time for questions. I was told, so there's a lucky one. Anya.
I feel like someone should have a thesaurus to gift you because you like synonyms so much.
Thank you very much, first of all, for the inspiration. And I would like to ask you for your comments about the new law in China now, I think since fall, where influencers or social media people are not allowed to share their opinion anymore unless they have proof of expertise, like a degree or some education. Do you think that is democratic or authoritarian, and what are your thoughts?
Well, first off, are we aware of this?
Yeah, I'm aware of it. I haven't looked into it, so I don't know all the details of it.
In light of my ignorance, is it as good as your knowledge?
I became aware of it just recently.
I think it's a tough one. Like, you know, obviously it's an authoritarian government that's bringing it in, if you're asking about authoritarian or democratic, right? And, you know, obviously we live in societies where you should be able to, where you should be able to speak freely. We have free expression in our societies. It's something that we very highly value. But then I think that there's also this consideration of, like, when you have platforms that are created in such a way that are designed to, spread opinions that are conspiratorial and, filled with false information and whatnot, like, what is the balance there? I don't think the balance then is on the individual, though, to be like, you cannot say this because you don't have expertise. I think that kind of shifts the kind of blame or the problem to the wrong place.
To the individual.
Exactly. Whereas I think the problem is actually the design of the platforms, how the platforms are put together, the kind of incentives that drive the decisions that they make, the way that they algorithmically amplify different content and things like that. So for me, my approach would not to be like, you as an individual cannot say this unless it is, having to do with hate speech or things like that, things that we agree are kind of off limits in our societies and under our definitions of free expression, which I understand are quite distinct, are quite different in Europe as they are in Canada than in the United States. But yeah, my approach is to say, let's think more about the platforms and what they do rather than who can say what if they don't have an expertise on a subject matter. I think we all like to express ourselves on different subjects even though we don't have formal education on them. And I think that, it should always be okay to do something like that. And maybe the one other piece that I would argue, and again, this is talking about things that we know about China, which maybe we don't have all the context on, but there's also the discussions about how social media platforms like TikTok or it has a different name in China, but operate very differently than they do in the West. So maybe there again is more of a discussion on how the platforms work, how we regulate the platforms, how we allow them to operate versus what we allow individuals to say on them.
So I think that an authoritarian government that was really serious about wanting to only bring knowledge forward that's fed by by actual expertise, well, it's like a historical critique analysis that you've tried to do also, like, you know, where is this coming from? And my idea is that, well, you would only have that diploma, that certificate in China if you learned what the party line was, right? At some point in your schooling, or so that would be probably the motivation. Now, a much better way to ensure that the difference can be made between nonsense and you know, something that's based on well-founded on a good, solid knowledge base, would be for us to be able to do this kind of historical critique, you know, with simple names, it's been called, I don't know, bullshit detection or other modes where the responsibility, I agree, is in how it's organized and structured on the platforms, but it's also in, you know, how equipped you let your publics be. Now I didn't use the synonym of audience. I said public. You know, there's a difference. So you
I'll give one last answer that follows Paris's one, follows both of yours. It's so easy for authoritarian governments to place the blame on the individual instead, and not just authoritarian, but corrupt or insufficiently efficient governments to blame the individual and criminalize an act instead of creating processes, mechanisms, regulation that will allow for better flow of information. For instance, 30, 40, 50 years ago, if you read an article in a newspaper, it would have been somewhat of a difficult thing to spread it out to your 1,000 best friends. Nowadays, there's no friction whatsoever in doing that, and you don't even have to read the article. And that's a technicality. That's a choice made by the platforms to make sharing as frictionless as possible. In order for you to share as much as possible, in order for you to engage with the platform and enrage people, and by that be there more and collect more ad revenue. So even adding more friction into the existing platforms, which would require regulation that nobody wants to do, would resolve some of that. And now we really need to go. I'll be an authoritarian about this. Thank you so much, Maya and Paris. I hope you stay here for a little bit and answer some more questions if people have in the audience. Public, audience, members of
this wonderful Congress community.
Congress community. Thank you so much for allowing us being inside on May 1st on such a glorious day outside. So thank you.
Viva la libertad.